Hello, this is Pamela Smyth, Media Relations Manager at the University of Waterloo. I'm one of the hosts of Beyond the Bulletin, the podcast of internal communications at the university. We bring you news and views from the Waterloo community. Please spread the word that we're on SoundCloud.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And now the interview from episode 90 of Beyond the Bulletin. In May, the remains of 215 children were discovered at the site of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Opening in 1890, it was once the largest residential school in the country. The federal government took it over from the Catholic Church in 1969, and it closed in 1978. The federal government announced it will distribute $27 million in funding to assist Indigenous communities in locating and memorializing children who died at residential schools. This money was announced in the budget back in 2019. Jean Becker is the Senior Director of Indigenous Initiatives and Interim Associate Vice President of Human Rights, Equity, and Inclusion at Waterloo. She discusses the discovery of the children's remains, the effects on truth and reconciliation, and what we can do now. Here is our conversation. Jean, welcome back.
Thank you, Pamela.
Many people across Canada, indeed across the world, are shocked and saddened by this tragic discovery in Kamloops. What did you think when you heard?
Well, I have to say, I wasn't shocked. I wasn't even surprised. This is not something that we haven't known for a very long time. You know, I have friends who were in residential schools, and I've heard the stories. I've read the testimonials from the Truth and Reconciliation Report, and if you've learned anything about the residential schools, this really isn't a very shocking or unexpected. But I was saddened. I was saddened that I'm partly saddened that it's shocking for so many Canadians because it indicates we still have a lot of work to do in terms of the truth part of reconciliation.
Because the survivors did talk about this.
Yes.
The Honorable Murray Sinclair, Chair of the Indian Residential School Truth and Reconciliation Commission, has spoken out, and he's reminded us that we know of 3,200 children who died at residential schools. Those are the ones we know about, but the number is likely to be much higher. And to add to that tragedy, their families were never informed and they were never returned home. They just didn't come back and nobody knew why. They didn't have a ceremony or a proper burial. So what do you think needs to happen now?
I think that the federal government needs to do what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission asked for when they discovered this fact during their hearings. This was uncovered then, and that's, back in somewhere between 2010 and 15. So I think that the government now needs to put the resources into place and begin the investigation. And they need to do the investigation thoroughly, properly. It needs to be continued until we have answers about those 3,200 that we know died in those schools. And we need to look for, the causes of those deaths. This is all possible with today's technology, and we need to commit to it, and we need to make sure that it happens this time.
When you talk about doing what the Truth and Reconciliation says, or the calls to action, I think you're talking about, I just saw this recently, call to action number 74. We call upon the federal government to work with the churches and Aboriginal community leaders to inform the families of children who died at residential schools of the child's burial location and to respond to families' wishes for appropriate commemoration ceremonies and markers and reburial in home communities where requested. So it's there.
It's there. And But it needs to go beyond simply those particular 3,200.
Hmm.
There needs to be they need to do the whatever technology was used that found the 215,
Hmm.
that technology needs to be employed around all of the residential schools.
Ground penetrating radar.
Yeah, that's the technology that they're using, and so that needs to take place. The I know that the residential school in Brantford, the Mohawk Institute,
Hmm.
they have been doing some of this work over a number of years, and there's still work to be done. So
Right.
this work should be properly resourced and conducted.
So there were more than 150 of these residential schools in Canada.
Mm,
And so far, 28 burial sites have been located. But I
yes,
mean, do the math.
yes,
And if we
that's
know the
very
history,
few. Yes.
yeah, that's a very small amount.
I heard today there is a at least one of the schools which is no longer there, has been turned into some kind of a park or playground or something where children today are playing on that site. And the idea that they're playing on top of children who were lost in such horrific circumstances, I think is really disturbing.
Where is that? Do you
I
know?
don't know. I heard a part of this report on CBC today. I just
Okay.
know that there are circumstances that, we need to understand. We need to know what's there. We need to be clear that in fact underneath that playground there isn't the
Oh,
graves of other children who have been forgotten. We need to remember. This is really what this is about for me, is we need to remember.
well, Chief Mark Hill from Six Nations of the Grand River has called for the federal government to conduct a radar scan. So, using that ground penetrating radar that located these 215 children in Kamloops, he would like them to use that technology at the former Mohawk Institute to know whether there is a mass grave there as well as other sites, not just there. He's calling on it for every all of them. He said, "quote The federal government must provide the means to help us locate the rest of our missing children whose lives were lost because of the government's actions."
Yes.
Well, after that, through Carolyn Bennett, Minister of Crown, Indigenous Relations, and Northern Affairs, the federal government announced that it was going to make $27 million available urgently to help Indigenous communities search for burial sites and memorialize the children. What do you think of this announcement?
I'm happy that it is happening.
It was in the 2019 federal budget. It was part of a larger pot of money, $33.8 million, dollars, that was
Mhm.
to address certain calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission
That
report.
that's correct. So understandably, I think the government is now coming under quite a bit of criticism for um, why wasn't it released when it was promised? And I think the answer that I read anyway was that they weren't ready to release it. So I don't know what it takes to get ready to release funds, so I can't comment on that. I can only
Mhm.
say I'm very happy that they're ready now, and the work will get done. And I hope that the process is set up in such a way that the communities can access the money and actually, get this process underway so that we
Mhm.
can get the truth. The work that was done in Kamloops could give us some indication of
Mhm.
whether it's enough money or not, but there's a lot of sites many of the sites are no longer there. The schools themselves were destroyed, and in some cases, other things have been built over those sites. So, I have no idea, how what kind of technical problems will arise in regard to actually being able to make sure that every one of the sites is examined.
So we should prepare for the discovery of more of these mass
Yeah.
graves.
That was such a poignant part of the Honorable Murray Sinclair's statement when he said, "Prepare yourselves. There's more to come."
Are people contacting you at all to discuss?
Yes, I mean, I've been. This is my home. This is my community. I'm Inuk. I was born and grew up in the north in Nunatsiavut in Labrador. But I have lived here for a very long time, over 40 years. So I'm very embedded in the Indigenous community in this region. I've done a lot of community work and worked with especially women's groups
Hmm.
throughout the years I've been here, and so, yes, people have been calling and just needing to talk and needing to share and needing to express, their sorrow and their sometimes their anger, sometimes just the devastation, of having heard this news. It makes it so present and real and immediate for people right now.
What effect could this have on reconciliation efforts?
Well, I felt before this happened that we're not at the reconciliation part yet.
Mm,
We're still in the truth part, and I think
mm,
that that's very evident with the shock and the surprise that people are feeling to hear that a number of children are buried there. Just the fact that they're shocked means that they didn't know, and this is news. So that means that there's still a great deal of of information that people just don't have yet.
mhm,
And I think that this is evidence that we need to deal with the truth and we need to know the truth. And
mhm.
this is, why the investigation is so important. We need to know what happened. We need to be able not only for the families that suffered those losses, we need to know, the country needs to know.
The truth part too is people need to believe the survivors. I mean, there were
Yeah.
horrific things that were horrific things given in testimony to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and people now are seeing that that stuff happened. It wasn't somebody
Yes,
telling tales, and that's part
exactly.
of it. Do you think that this could be a turning point?
I hope that it is a turning point. I hope that it is a another movement forward, just as the TRC itself was a movement forward, the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. But if the response falls short, then the opportunity will be lost. It's an opportunity for us. But if we don't seize it and if action isn't taken, it won't make a difference.
Right. There's a momentum right now with
Yeah. Yes.
people talking about it. It's, you know, the top item in the news still and on social media feeds. And yeah.
Yes. And that is doesn't last very long.
Well, the Honorable Murray Sinclair says that we're at a different point of maturity in this story. We've
Yes, I
learned
mean,
more, we've felt more, we've cried more, we've felt ashamed more. I feel ashamed that a government took certain actions in my name. That's how I feel. I don't even feel comfortable saying that because it isn't about us and our feelings anyway. Maybe we need to talk about the things we need to do. And I'm not going to ask you because I don't think that it's fair to put the onus on you to say, what can we do, people who are non-Indigenous? So I've got some
thank you.
suggestions. I've got some suggestions. And
Mm.
you tell me if I'm on the right track if you want, and feel free to add if you would like. People could write their federal representative, their MP,
Yes,
and the prime minister,
yes.
and uh, perhaps your MPP, because education falls under provincial jurisdiction. So, I mean, I don't recall ever learning about residential schools when I was a child. I was in university, I think, before I heard about it.
There's quite a number of really good books that have been written
Good.
to use in discussions with young children, that discussions that are appropriate to their age and their
Mm.
level of understanding. So I actually think that elementary school is where it could begin or should
Oh,
begin. And then, you know, throughout schooling and certainly at post secondary, we should be leaders in bringing this into curriculum, into the education. Most universities don't yet have courses on residential schools, but this is something that this is one of the recommendations of the TRC is to make sure that we have that curriculum in the school
mm.
system.
Anyway, the onus is on us. The onus is on us to find a solution. And, you know, we
Yeah.
could go to look at the displays of all of the moccasins, for instance, at the Mohawk Institute, um,
Yes.
the former Mohawk Institute, I should say. Do something that's relevant and helpful now. And it might be demanding adherence to the 94 calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we could at least read them and be aware of what we should be expecting our government to do.
And if you read the report itself, then it will give you a better understanding of what those schools were and what they were doing and why they are still having an impact in our communities today, even after they've all been closed now. I think the last one closed in 1996, but there's no question that even my children, my grandchildren, have some impact from what happened in those schools.
Does this discovery affect the direction of your work?
At Waterloo, we're really just beginning to establish an indigenization strategy and to develop it into something that will be impactful across the entire campus. So we're doing a lot of work to establish the Indigenous initiatives and an indigenization, decolonization strategy. And really we're at the very beginning of doing it. I don't know that this will impact it, but hopefully it will bring more awareness to what we're doing. And mostly it will bring more awareness, I hope, to why we're doing it. But I think that this really will help to highlight the importance of the work and the absolute imperative for Waterloo, as well as all other post secondary institutions, to make sure that this work is carrying on and that it's being done in a really good way.
And you have something very special coming up.
We are having an event on June the 29th at 1 p.m. With the Honorable Murray Sinclair. He's he's a very powerful speaker to begin with, but his experience, through all the years of his career is invaluable in terms of understanding Indigenous issues, and he's such a positive and kind spirit. He really makes a difference when he speaks. So I'm really excited that he's agreed to do this event with us.
Well, and to help people register for the event, we will put a link to it in our show notes on SoundCloud. So
Awesome.
people just go there and they click on it and then they can register.
Great. Thank you so much.
Now, that event is part of Indigenous History Month,
Yes.
right? Recognize Indigenous History Month. And now, how do you feel about the fact that we have an Indigenous History Month? I mean, given Canada's history with its Indigenous people, is it appropriate to have a month? Isn't it every day?
Yeah, you're right. It's every day. But I would say that given the the lack of knowledge, I mean, some people are still saying, what's a residential school? There are those of us who do know and maybe know quite a bit about the residential schools and the overall history of the colonization of Canada. There are still a lot of people who know nothing about it, even though it's, as you said, it should be every day. It isn't every day, and it may be never, but maybe if there is, this month that we've designated and we put out special effort and special emphasis on Indigenous issues, that perhaps will attract a few more people to think about these things and to try and interest people in educating themselves in the matter, because there's only so much you can do with an hour talk or
Mm-hmm.
um, an event of any sort. Really, it's all intended to interest people in further investigations so that people will read a bit, they'll
Mm-hmm.
watch some films. There are so many amazing Indigenous authors and filmmakers today and artists. It's such a rich time for us in so many ways, and there's so much available. Another event we're having actually in June is we're doing an hour with an Inuk opera singer, the
Oh,
only Inuk opera singer in Canada, as far as we know, and as far as she knows. This is an exciting event for us too, to
wow.
celebrate her and her career.
Fantastic. There's obviously a performance aspect as well as a
Yes,
talk.
she's going to sing as well as we'll do an interview with her. Her name is Deantha Edmonds. Deantha's event is a noon event on June the 21st, National
Oh, on National Indigenous Peoples Day.
Indigenous Peoples Day. Yeah.
Oh. Well, we'll put a link to that event in our show notes as well. I will definitely be there. I wouldn't miss it.
She
Now,
sings in Inuktitut.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
What else do you want people to know? What other points did you want to make, Jean?
I think the biggest thing I would say is in regard to the discovery at Kamloops is, you mentioned earlier when you were speaking that you feel shame and, probably guilt, regret, whatever. And I think to non-Indigenous people, I would want to say, that I understand that sort of feeling would come, and people would feel helpless. When you feel ashamed, you can also become very defensive, and that can lead to denial. So I think that, shame and guilt are not useful. They're
Mm-hmm.
not useful responses. And
Mm-hmm.
if you want to do something, the things that you already mentioned are really good ways of showing the people who are able to make some changes that you care. And I think that, making sure that as individuals we do learn and understand and go through that growth that dealing with your own sense of shame or guilt requires. That's what people can do that will help them to reach a place where they can be effective
Mm-hmm.
voices to make a difference in how things are done in the future. And for me, the fact that for so many years there's been denial publicly and just generally, there's been denial of these things. As you said, some of the stories are so horrific, you can't even believe that they could possibly happen. Well, they did happen. And, we are still feeling the effects of those things. So I think that ending denial and confronting these truths is so important.
Agreed. Jean, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this interview from the Beyond the Bulletin podcast from the University of Waterloo. You can listen to all of episode 90 by looking for the Beyond the Bulletin podcast on SoundCloud.com. Don't forget to tell your Waterloo colleagues and friends about us. Thanks for going Beyond the Bulletin with me.